They pushed us all the time to do the best.
More and more.
More and more and higher and higher. It ended on a very natural way because we said from the beginning that when it doesn't feel funny anymore, we stop.
Picture this. Stockholm, winter of 1982. Backstage at a private industry gala tucked away in the marble halls of the Grand Hôtel. Candlelight flickers over champagne glasses, Swedish elites mingling in hushed tones. Then a shift in the room. Agnetha Faltskog, the voice of ABBA, slips quietly out a side door alone. No drama, no explanation, just a soft smile, a nod, and a disappearing silhouette. The reason? A name on the guest list. Not a rival singer. Not a jilted lover. A performer whose presence cut too deep. No confrontation. No scene. Just a quiet exit and decades of silence. For years, no one asked. And Agnetha never told. No fiery interviews. No cryptic lyrics. Just that serene image, untouched, unbothered. But now, that silence is cracking. In a rare and vulnerable moment, Agnetha Faltskog is finally revealing the names of the musicians who stirred something deeper than dislike. Those who clashed with her values, mocked her music, or left wounds she never cared to explain. Some on this list were icons. Some once friends. All of them left a mark. This isn't about petty feuds or fading spats. These are stories that paint a very different picture of the pop world's most private star. A woman of elegance, yes, but also of fierce emotional boundaries. And the first name on her list? A rock god whose charm, she says, was anything but harmless. Mick Jagger, the charmer who crossed the line. It was supposed to be harmless, just another music festival in the summer of '79. ABBA was performing, the Rolling Stones were headlining, and the green rooms were packed with stars. But the moment Mick Jagger spotted Agnetha, everything shifted. To the public, Mick was the embodiment of rock and roll magnetism. To Agnetha, he was a walking storm, intense, unpredictable, and far too invasive for her comfort. He swaggered over with his trademark grin, tried to charm her with cheeky remarks, and casually floated the idea of a playful duet, one loaded with innuendo. She didn't argue, didn't respond, just stood, turned, and walked away. For Agnetha, it wasn't a matter of shyness, it was a matter of principle. She had built her career on grace, modesty, and musical discipline. Mick represented the opposite, wild energy, unchecked ego, and a recklessness that made her skin crawl. In a never-released 1983 interview, she quietly remarked, "There's charm, and then there's something else. With Mick, I didn't feel safe." The world saw a rock god. She saw a red flag. And after that encounter, she avoided every joint appearance with the Stones. Polite but distant, always choosing a different room, a different seat, a different stage. Because for Agnetha, it wasn't just about disliking Mick Jagger. It was about protecting her space from a world that didn't understand boundaries. David Bowie, the glittering genius she couldn't feel. He was a legend, a visionary, a shapeshifter who turned music into art and made the world lean in. But for Agnetha Faltskog, David Bowie wasn't a kindred spirit. He was a mystery she never wanted to solve. It was at a European award show in 1976 that their worlds collided. ABBA had just swept the continent with their shimmering harmonies. Bowie sat only a few chairs away, dressed in futuristic silver and quiet confidence. Everyone expected a moment, two icons, one conversation. It never came. Agnetha spent the night looking past him, smiling politely to everyone else. Later, when asked about Bowie's music, she called it brilliant but distant. That was as much emotion as she would allow, because deep down, Bowie's boldness unnerved her. His androgyny, his theatricality, his fearless dive into sexuality and politics, it overwhelmed Agnetha, who cherished privacy, subtlety, and emotional safety. Where she saw clarity, he thrived in ambiguity. And when rumors spread that Bowie had once dismissed ABBA as Swedish robots, it wasn't just a joke to her, it was a wound. She never fired back. That wasn't her way. But insiders say that comment stayed with her. Long after the spotlight moved on, she remembered the chill Bowie brought into the room, and the way he made her feel like a stranger in her own industry. To the world, he was Ziggy Stardust. To her, he was just someone she could never truly see or trust. Sid Vicious, the rebellion that felt like hate. If Agnetha was the voice of sweetness and harmony, Sid Vicious was its antithesis. He didn't just reject pop, he spit on it. Literally. As bassist for the Sex Pistols, Sid made it his mission to mock, provoke, and destroy everything Agnetha held dear. She didn't need to meet him to feel his fury. One day in 1978, driving through London, Agnetha glanced out her car window and froze. A brick wall had been tagged in large, red letters. ABBA sucks. The paint still dripping. That same week, the Sex Pistols mocked ABBA in an interview, calling them music for brain-dead housewives. Agnetha never said a word publicly, but those close to her said she took it personally, deeply. Punk to her wasn't freedom. It was violence. Not art, but an attack. And when both ABBA and the Sex Pistols performed in the same city just nights apart, security was quietly doubled for her. Threats from punk fans were real. The tension was thick. The fear undeniable. Later, she described that period as exhausting and ugly. It wasn't just about Sid. It was about a movement that made her feel unsafe in a world she'd spent years building with grace. Sid Vicious didn't know her, but his voice, rough, angry, and proud of it, echoed louder than most. And to Agnetha, he didn't just hate pop. He hated her. Frank Zappa, the genius who mocked her melody. Frank Zappa was hailed as a musical genius. Complex, daring, uncompromising. But to Agnetha, he was something else, dismissive, condescending, and painfully arrogant. She never denied his talent. But when Zappa famously quipped that ABBA made audio candy for the mentally sedated, it didn't just sting. It cut to the heart of everything she worked for. That kind of comment didn't feel like critique. It felt like a slap in the face. Behind the scenes, letters between ABBA's management reveal how shaken Agnetha was. She felt belittled by musicians who crowned themselves as real artists while sneering at pop stars like her. It wasn't about defending fame. It was about defending heart. She believed in melody, connection, and sincerity. Zappa believed in pushing buttons and boundaries. When asked about experimental rock in a 1980 Swedish interview, she kept her tone measured but firm. "There's art in simplicity," she said. "Complexity is not always genius." She never mentioned him by name, but she didn't have to. To Agnetha, Zappa's brilliance was undeniable, but so was his cruelty. He turned his back on emotional warmth in favor of intellectual spectacle. And in his world, artists like her didn't belong. She didn't hate his music. She hated what it stood for. A world where sincerity was weakness, and joy was something to ridicule. Madonna, the spotlight she never wanted. When Madonna burst onto the scene in the early 1980s, she didn't just break rules. She set them on fire. For millions, she was a symbol of power and liberation. But for Agnetha, she was a whirlwind of noise, flash, and everything she hoped to avoid. Agnetha didn't understand it. Why fame had to be so loud. Why performances had to shock. After seeing Madonna's Like a Virgin moment at the 1984 MTV Awards, complete with writhing, underwear, and unapologetic sexuality, Agnetha turned away from the screen in disbelief. "I don't understand why it has to be so vulgar," she said quietly in a 1992 interview that was never aired. Agnetha came from a world where modesty was a virtue, where music spoke softly and deeply. She had always kept her fame at arm's length, retreating from the chaos when it got too loud. But Madonna charged into it with open arms, courting scandal like a friend. It wasn't jealousy. It was a clash of values. Where Agnetha protected her privacy, Madonna made hers a performance. Where Agnetha sang of heartbreak and hope, Madonna sang of provocation and power. And in that space, Agnetha felt lost, like the world had changed into something she didn't recognize. Madonna didn't just change pop music. She changed the rules of being a woman in the spotlight. And for Agnetha, those rules came with a price she was never willing to pay. Freddie Mercury, the star too big for the stage. Freddie Mercury wasn't just a singer. He was a force of nature. Dazzling, fearless, magnetic. Every note he sang felt like a thunderclap. And for many, that was magic. But for Agnetha, it was overwhelming. She admired Queen's music. She even called their harmonies impressive in an old Swedish article. But Freddie himself? He was something she couldn't quite process. His stage presence was volcanic. His outfits, his confidence, his power, they consumed every room he entered. During a 1980 award ceremony, when asked to do a joint interview with him, Agnetha politely declined. Publicly, she said she preferred to let the music do the talking. But privately, it was clear, Freddie's energy made her uncomfortable. She once whispered to a close friend, "It's not that he's unkind, it's that he's everywhere." Where Agnetha offered vulnerability, Freddie roared with theatrical strength. Where she delivered emotion in quiet verses, he turned pain into power ballads, under lights and fireworks. It wasn't envy. It was dissonance. She found his performances exhausting rather than inspiring. She respected him, even liked his voice. But the way he owned every stage, it clashed with the emotional intimacy she believed in. Freddie represented a version of artistry that Agnetha never wanted, larger than life, loud, and built to conquer. And to her, music was never about conquest, it was about connection. Alice Cooper, the nightmare she couldn't unsee. There was no missing Alice Cooper. The makeup, the snakes, the guillotines, his entire stage persona was built to shock, to disturb, to linger in your mind long after the lights went down. But for Agnetha, that wasn't entertainment. It was a horror show. Their paths nearly crossed in 1975 at a major German music festival. Both were invited, but when Agnetha learned she'd be seated next to Cooper for the press panel, she backed out. No scandal, no fight, just a firm, quiet refusal. Music should never frighten people, she later told a Swedish magazine. To her, Alice's brand of shock rock wasn't bold, it was a violation. Where she sought to soothe, he sought to jolt. His props, fake blood, electric chairs, theatrical killings, weren't just theatrics in her eyes. They were an attack on the emotional purity she valued. And it wasn't just about personal taste. It was deeper. Agnetha believed in beauty, in healing through harmony. And Alice, he wielded fear like a guitar solo. Those who saw her that night said she looked genuinely shaken. "I don't want to share air with someone who makes music terrifying," she allegedly muttered to a handler. It wasn't about moral outrage. It was about emotional survival. In a world growing louder and darker, Alice Cooper was the embodiment of everything she tried to keep out of her life, and her music. For decades, Agnetha Faltskog was the picture of grace. She stood beneath glittering lights, sang to the world with clarity and calm, and never once raised her voice in anger. But silence doesn't mean indifference. And now, all these years later, that silence is finally breaking. This list wasn't born from drama. It wasn't about headlines or revenge. It came from something far more personal. A woman trying to protect her peace in an industry that rarely offered any. These weren't just musicians she disliked. They were artists who shook her, challenged her values, or reminded her of everything she didn't want to become. Some were chaotic, some too bold. Others simply didn't see the world the way she did. But what makes Agnetha's story so striking isn't just who made her list. It's that she carried it quietly for so long. No feuds, no outbursts, just boundaries wrapped in melodies. And now, with time and distance, she's revealing her truth, not to burn bridges, but to finally tell the other side of her story. The one behind the soft smile, the one behind the harmonies. Because even the gentlest voices have limits.